All right, guys, welcome to another Combat Ready Fire Training Tuesday night. We have a pretty exciting podcast, I think, planned for this evening on a pretty good hot topic. We're going to be talking about the backbone of the fire service, the engine company, of course. A couple things we're going to try and get into tonight to kind of give you kind of a lay of the land of the conversation. We're going to try and start off talking a little bit about setup of the rig, and how we're building out our companies and developing our plans and stuff like that. I think a great discussion that we're going to get into is some company drills that you can do, and specifically company drills that you can do as one company, because I know that a lot of times people's challenge is, whether they're in a single station department or a multi-station department, but everybody else is busy. What can I do in the firehouse, just with me and my crew, or just, with me as an individual? So we'll talk about that. Then we're going to get into some strategy and tactics, and I'm not sure we've allotted enough time for all of this, because some of the things we're going to try and get into is some water supply stuff. Obviously, there's a lot of great debate out there about supply lines versus tank water and stuff like that. I'm sure we'll have some thoughts on that. And we're also going to try and drop some comments on our experiences and practices with some rural water supply operations also. We'll talk a little bit about, maybe the 360, masking up on the rig versus masking up at the door. And then we're going to try and get into some of the, our thoughts and experiences of some of the different positions on the engine company and getting the line in service. And one of the things I kind of really want to focus on in there is, looking at that 3-person engine company where you're working with a driver, an officer, and a firefighter. And, how do you make that workflow work? How do you fill all the positions when you're operating with limited staffing? So got a pretty action-packed conversation. We hope that if you're watching us live, that if you have anything you'd like us to bring up, you drop it in the comments, and we'll try and make sure that we get it on the show. But joining me tonight, I have a pretty good cast of characters from some various backgrounds, all guys that I have the opportunity to teach with and either currently work with or have worked with over the years. So we'll just kind of go around and let everybody take an opportunity to introduce themselves. Tim, or I'm sure I'll call you Spray Nine at some point during the night for those who are wondering who I'm talking to. I know you're listening to a fire right now, but if you have a moment, kind of say a couple seconds about your background.
All right, so my name's Tim McCloskey. A lot of people know me as Spray Nine. Like Nick, I started out in the suburbs of Philadelphia, graduated high school, moved to Prince George County, Maryland, where I lived at Bladensburg, then moved up the street to the Kentland Volunteer Fire Department and lived there for about 7 or 8 years. Rose to the ranks, became a lieutenant early on, and held that for a number of years. Then my wife told me to grow up and move out of the firehouse. I moved to South Carolina. I started working in Horry County. It's a very rural department. You do have some busier battalions. Now, most recently, I work in the Low Country in the West Ashley portion of Charleston. And that's where I'm at now.
Very good.
Go back
Very
in the
good.
war.
Tim and I had some good times and some, let's just say, some wild experiences living at Kentland together over the years. So I'm sure some of that'll come up. Frank Malta, what's up, man? I got to ask you, I always kind of thought that you were primarily an engine guy, but I think Sean was telling me you're a closet special ops guy. Can you comment on that at all? Or?
Yeah, there was a time and day, but that ship's kind of sailed now. But no, yeah, Frank Malta, Battalion Chief of Training for the Frederick County, Maryland Fire Department. Prior to being assigned to the desk here at the Training Academy, I spent the bulk of my career on engine companies.
All right, Sean, what's up, man? How are you doing?
Good, Sean Donovan. I'm sure Frank will come down to my office after this and handle business since I dropped that special ops comment. But yeah, so 19 years on the job in Frederick County as well. Currently assigned our headquarters, but throughout my career, a majority of it definitely on an engine company.
Awesome. And then working live from Salisbury tonight, our very own Spencer White, working at Engine Company 3 tonight. What's going on over there, Spencer? You want to tell the guys a little about you?
Spencer White, been here at Salisbury for coming up on 12 years. I started out as an engine guy. I rode the ladder for pretty much my whole backwards career. And then I kind of got roped into some engine stuff out of curiosity. And then next thing I know, I'm heading up hose and nozzle committees and stuff like that. Drove the engine for few years. And then I got promoted 5 years ago, and I've been out here at Station 3 ever since. And I like doing engine work because I'm a simple guy, and I like to keep it simple on the.
Awesome. Do you have the world's coolest wagon driver driving you tonight? I didn't look at staffing.
Yeah, the hip boots are on the truck tonight, so hopefully we catch one.
That guy gets some good fireground images. So, and those hip boots seem to bring him good luck. So I'm all about it. So a variety, kind of got a different set of background here, and everything. And I guess let's kind of jump into it a little bit. And since Spencer is riding one tonight, I guess there's probably nobody better to kind of start the conversation about just kind of talking a little bit about, what are your thoughts, or what would you share with people in terms of, setting up the rig, setting up like the crew or the plan of the day, or just kind of your thoughts on kind of like, you lead a very busy engine company every day, and you guys, especially lately, have been catching a lot of work. You got a very cool old school single piece house, just, 3 guys and a fire engine there. What would you kind of share with guys that you've learned in your time, being a captain out there at 3 and stuff about, leading a good engine company?
I pretty much try not to dive too deep in it. I keep it simple. I mean, every day it's just, we try to stretch lines every day, mask ups and whatnot. We just keep it geared towards basic engine work, because I mean that's really the grunt of it. That's what firefighting's all about. It's putting the fire out, but keeping it simple. So usually during the day, if we're doing our checkoffs, if we find a line that's not to our liking, stretch it. That's our morning drill, like you posted the other day. Setting ourselves up for success early on, so we don't have to worry about it later. Like when we get here in the morning, my guys know that first things first is whenever they jump on the rig, their equipment's first. So gear, air pack, radios. Second thing is not the medical bags, it's those nozzles. So the fireman will take a lap around the truck, make sure everything's good to go. And like I said, if he finds a line that's not to his liking, it could be like as simple as the red line doesn't match up with the other red line in a section of hose. We'll pull it off and repack it. That gives us a drill. And I like to nail down on the basics of that. And then as far as my workflow, every day I always keep a routine. So you see over there, my gear is set up on the wall exactly how I want it. That's the way it is every day. Coming up in the rig, gloves are always in front of me. My tick and my helmet are right there next to me. And I try to nail down that basic routine every day. So whenever, things are getting real, I'm not missing anything. I'm ready to go, and try to keep my mind that way too. And yeah. Um, During the day, we go stretch district almost every day. We'll find a building. Sometimes we'll stretch multiple times on the same building. In my time here as an officer, I've never once stopped by somebody in the public saying, "What are you doing here? Get off my property." Usually it's, "Hey, is there something on fire?" And you're saying, "No, we're just practicing." And they'll be like, "Oh, okay, that's cool," and they'll like go off and show you stuff. It's a great way to get in the community. But stretching in your first due is the best training you can get as far as the engine.
Yeah, I think it's kind of surprising how many people don't do that. How many people are not out there stretching, in their first due all the time, and it seems like it's a revolving excuse factory. Like there are some people who are like, well, I can't do that because what if we have a fire and then we'll already have hose off, and then it's, oh well, we can't do that because people call the fire chief and they're mad at us because we were on their property, or whatever. But I don't know, Frank or Tim or Sean, you guys got any thoughts on that, on the stretching in your first due, how to make it happen, that kind of stuff?
Yeah, so I'm on board with what Spencer's saying. We would go out in the area and run lines all the time, and more times than not, it was the conversation starter with people in the community, right? They want to know what you're doing, and then once you explain it, they ask a bunch of questions and have a better idea of what it is we do, and helps to dispel some of the the old adage that we're just sitting around watching TV and hanging out in the firehouse. And then I would even take it one step further. I would like to. I was notorious for sneaking into other people's areas to catch the rare places to see what we could do and what we could get for when we're running the third due assignment. That way I know if we're running a certain 100 block or whatever, if I catch the street behind, I can get it from going through this yard or that yard, and that's a crowd pleaser when it works out.
Yeah, 100%. And Sean, you got anything to add on that?
Yeah, so like on top of that, so not only is like being out, that's what the community wants to see. Like, so you're building that relationship with the community, you're building that trust. And then like I know when I was a lieutenant at Engine Company 31, like we wanted practice stretching in like a hotel. So how do we do that, right? So it's just going out there and holding that discussion with the manager there. Hey, what time frame would work best for you that I can bring out my shift and we can kind of stretch through your building, but I want to do it respectfully, so in a time period during the day where it's not that busy. And for that hotel, hey, that's easy. 10 a.m. everybody's typically out doing what they have to do for the day. You can come out here for about an hour and stretch all you want, and that's what we did.
Yeah, I think that's the easiest thing. I mean, yeah, if you're, if there's somebody else's property involved, I mean, obviously the way to address that problem proactively is to go have that conversation like you're talking about. But I don't think, from a fire administration perspective, I don't feel like there's anything I can defend to the community more than our people being out in the community, practicing their job, learning their buildings, getting better, being dedicated. Like there's nothing more easy to defend, I think, right? So, Tim, I kind of, I know from our time at Kentland, obviously what the engine company expectation was there, and what the expectation was every day in terms of stretching lines, re-racking lines, all that kind of stuff. How have you kind of seen that kind of carry forward, to the other places that you've gone? Because I mean, obviously now, like me, you've kind of moved a little bit south. Things are a little bit different. Mindsets are a little bit different, anywhere you go. So, what have you seen kind of the places you've been, and how have you kind of carried that mindset forward?
Like Spencer was talking about, it's all about the basics. Firegrounds is 100% about the basics, and just, like we were kind of brainwashed at Kentland about, pulling lines and repacking lines each and every day. That's what sets up Firegrounds. Andy Frederick said, as the first line goes, so does the fire. That is tried and true. Um, so getting out there every single shift, you know, down here in the South, in South Carolina, I've seen it where, you'll have companies that don't get out there and they don't pull lines. And so when fires actually occur, they're not doing the job that needs to be done. They are failing. And that's something that we can prepare for prior to a fire occurring, so that when that worst fire of your life actually occurs, which you'll never know when that day is going to come, you're set up and you're ready to go.
Yeah. And I think, Spencer kind of hit on it kind of already in the beginning. I knew we were going to end up blending these topics together. I had this sequential idea, and that's just not going to happen, because one of the first things he talked about was, that morning stretch, that it's something I see our engine companies doing more on more mornings than not, that, during that shift change time, ours at 8 a.m. So that 8 to 9 a.m. time right after shift change, very commonly, like the guys are out back or they're out front and they're stretching an attack line because it just looked funny how it was racked and they wanted to re-rack it, or because they just wanted to get a stretch in. I've heard some captains talk about how, especially if they have a rookie firefighter, or maybe every day, they take turns stretching every pre-connected line on the engine. And so, I'd be interested to kind of hear your guys' thoughts, or Spencer, let you expand on that. And Frank, I know you've got some stuff on that. But one thing I did just want to say before I forget to is, the other thing, the culture that most of us have all come up in is the culture that when a box alarm, or reported structure fire, for those unfamiliar, when a box drops, I mean, it's all hands on deck, and we're moving like it's a fire until it's not. And, for almost all of my career, that has also included that, as especially the first due, if not all the engines who are assigned a hose line assignment, as they arrive on scene, we stretch on every box alarm. And we do that here in Salisbury. And when we did that, in Columbia, and we did that at Kentland, and we did that in Washington, D.C., and we did it everywhere else I've ever been. And I can think back to my time, on very busy engine companies in Washington, D.C., where, we sent 5 engines on a box, and the 5th engine was RIT. So you had 4 engines stretching. And I can think of times, multiple times a day maybe, where we would go to a box, all 4 engines would stretch. Some of them would have to get very creative in their stretch, because the later arriving you were, the further away you were, and we all stretched from our own engines. So you had, people doing lines over ladders, you had people doing, stretching the 350 or building out the 650 or whatever, and then it would turn out to be food on the stove, and everybody would be like, all right guys, good game, like it was a fun practice, and put it back on the rig. And like, that was not looked down upon at all. That was looked forward as like, man, I would rather go to 1 box alarm than 10 medicals. I would rather go to 1 box and stretch and get that rep in, and yes, enjoy some of the competition, and like feel like a firefighter being ready for a fire. And I'll let you guys kind of chime in on that, but I say all that to say that in some of the conversation that we have, and I posted a video about it the other day that garnered the topics it always does. People are like, what? You pull hose off a fire truck if there's not fire showing? And I was like, yes, for, a dozen different reasons we do that. But, then the other weird thing that you'll hear when you get into conversations about the water supply thing, like I know one of the conversations about the water supply and even about the 360 is going to be, we don't have time for that. It's for them, brother. We got to get in there for them. And I'm like, all right, well, when they dropped the box 3 hours ago and there was nothing showing, you didn't want to stretch that line to have it at the front door ready for them, did you? Like, if you're gonna be about it, let's be about it. I mean, I don't want to stay on my soapbox too much longer, but when we talk about that proactive stretch, I mean, the number one reason to stretch a line when somebody says their house is on fire is because maybe they told the truth, and maybe their house is on fire. And the faster you have that line in place, the better things are going to get for everybody. Right. And if you don't like that one, the second best reason to stretch that line is because there's no better possible drill you can get today than an unannounced box alarm at an unknown time at an address that you don't know where it's going to be, and that whole surprise real world factor. And so I don't know, I just thought that was interesting commentary, how in some conversations we want to play both sides of the fence. We want to be all for them about this, but I'm not willing to take 10 minutes to pull and pack a cross lay. But anyway, thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's that whole argument, like, oh, we don't have time to do this. It's all about them. Your seconds count. Like, be that as it may, I don't understand why you would neglect doing certain tasks that ultimately go toward the big picture. Furthermore, if you're looking to save time, being proficient is the best way to save time, right? Being proficient in the stretch quickly with gloves, knocking that 360 out, getting a good position. These are all things that contribute toward the big picture. That if you cut corners on the calls that don't pan out, it's not going to go good on where the calls where it counts.
Yeah, 100%. Anything to add to that? Go ahead, Tim.
There's a book out there called Atomic Habits, right? And it's all about creating habits. And if you do this each and every time you go out the door and you're going down the street, you're going to create a habit. And this is a good habit, because if you look at major issues on fire grounds, one of the big keys is water supply. Listen, within the last 2-3 months, I went out for a reported house fire. The first 2 engine company pulled up with smoke showing from the front door. It was a small kitchen fire. They knocked it down with a can. We ripped the microwave out. I take it out front thinking there's a hose line there. We can finish soaking it down. There was no hose line. There was probably 15 hand tools from engine companies in the yard. I was like, what the heck is going on? This is our job. There's no better way, as you said, to get any sort of practice or to get the habit going than when you go out for a reported structure fire, you lay that supply line, you pull that hand line. I was at another fire recently where the first 2 engine, said, oh, well, it was a working fire. We didn't lay the supply line. We wanted to rely on the second in company. And that second in company went to reverse lay. Now they're relying, they're looking for the hydrant, and they missed it, right? Because it happens. But they clearly passed up a hydrant as they were pulling in, and they just said, "Oh, we want to leave room for other apparatus to get here. We want to do the reverse lay." This screwed up an entire fire ground for probably 15, 20 minutes. We had to transition to a defensive tactic. It was in a larger house, and it's a big part of it was because the first two engine did not want to lay a supply line. And when you make it a habit, you'll run into a fire that we had at Kentland back in 2013, where we had a quadruple fatal fire. We had no reports of entrapment prior to us getting there. We lay the supply line. The mother meets me in the street. I say we got people trapped. We make entry. From the time I turned my camera on when we started laying our supply line to putting the fire out and removing 4 victims was 7 minutes. And it's all because of the habit that we do each and every day. My lineman was 19, 20 years old. My layout guy was, maybe 22. I was 25. It's not like we were older people, but because you create the habits, especially for those younger, members that aren't getting the experience, you're creating the habit. Now they have something to fall back on.
Yeah, I think you said so many great things in there. I mean, but it's so many people want to involve in the conversation. What if this? What if that? What if there are people trapped? What if there aren't people trapped? Bro, none of it matters. You know why it doesn't matter? Because every fire is the offensive fire with people trapped, and you're going to have a mayday until you prove that it's not. And you might as well just assume that's what's going to happen, because until the fire is over, you don't know that that is what's happening. I mean, regarding the whole entrapment thing, I mean, people pull up on fires and there are people in there and nobody tells them anything. People pull up on fires and there's nobody in there, but somebody says somebody's in there. And people pull up on fires where there's somebody in there and other people tell them nobody's in there. Like, it's all a guess. It's all a guess, and the only thing that tells you, like our like we were kind of taught back in the day, is the only time there's not somebody in there is when we've done the primary search. Mick McKenzie taught me that on day one. We declare it when we declare the primary, and so up until that moment, you might as well be assuming that the fire you're at is the offensive fire with people trapped in the mayday, and you got to do the things necessary to be successful if that's the case. And we talk about that in a million different programs. But, Frank, I know you talk about this stuff a lot, around your department and on the gram, as they say. So what would you add to this conversation?
Just back to the proficiency, like don't cut corners and expect it to work out on game day. Everything that we do is a perishable skill, right? I think there's a lot of people. The engine company's not sexy, right? It's not a ladder truck. It's not a rescue squad. But anyone with sense or more than 10 minutes in the fire department knows that only water puts out fire, and only the engine company carries water. So in order for that fire to go out, the engine company needs to do what they do. Nobody else on the fire ground is able to do what they do without water on the fire, right? Maybe briefly, but not sustainably.
Well, and so we're ahead of the engine conversation a little bit, or ahead of, we got into the water stuff, right? I planned to get in that in a couple minutes, but here we find ourselves. So let's talk about it, right? And right now, I think that there are two prevailing mindsets. Two prevailing mindsets as our approach to water supply to structure fire. And the first is that what we're familiar with, where the first in engine lays a supply line, a dry supply line, fights fire off of tank water until another engine company arrives on scene and usually positions on the hydrant, charges it, and then later leaves their apparatus there to pump it. And the other one is a scenario where the first in engine goes in, fights fire on tank water, And then from there it diverges a little bit. Some departments have the second in engine lay a supply line, and some departments have the second in engine go to the first due engine and basically nurse them or provide them with their tank water, and then the third engine establish a water supply. And I know, because I know all of you, what your departments do and everything, but what comments would you, I mean, everybody on this call, I think, operates in the first one, right? Everybody here is laying out, and, the first two engines laying out and fighting fire off tank water. Second or so engine is picking up the hydrant and sending the hydrant water. What would you say about that? Or what, would you say about the other techniques?
So I you hear sometimes in the rural environment where oh yeah, we had to back the guys out because of a water supply issue. That's one thing. If you don't have water, you don't have water, right? But in the urban environment, when you're a block away from a fire hydrant, your water supply issue is self-induced. That's a problem.
Yeah, I think it'd certainly be hard to justify running out of water 200 feet away from a fire hydrant. Another thing that has been an interesting experience that I've had is, I'll be in a conversation with a group of people about rural firefighting operations, and we get all wound up on tankers, right? And there's you think there's a lot of approaches for municipal water supply. There's a lot of schools of thought out there for rural water supply, but anybody who runs rural water supply operations is pretty passionate about making sure they have enough water coming, and moving water on wheels, and they're passionate about whether they want to use the clapper valve or drop tanks, and they're very focused on water, because in the rural environment you have to bring your own, right? And it's interesting that you'll have those conversations about, with guys that'll fight about the difference between a 1,000 gallon tanker and a 2,000 gallon tanker. And then you get on the topic of a fire in an area with fire hydrants, and they're like, oh yeah, well, we don't get our own water supply. And I'm like, wait a minute. In the rural environment, we're upside down and sideways about water supply, but in the city environment, we're just like, never mind that. And one of the things that really bothers me, quite honestly, and I'd be interested to hear your guys' thoughts on it, is, there's conversation going on out there that basically is, if I'm paraphrasing, is, man, most fires are put out with less than tank water. If you can't put out fire with 1 or 2 tanks of water, that's it anyway, or you're no kind of firefighter or whatever. And I'll just tell you my thoughts on that. I mean, it makes me wonder, does anybody else go to any real working fires? Because I don't go to the most fires of every firefighter in the country, but I've been doing this for 30 years, and I've gone to enough to say that I've been to a lot of good fires where if you didn't have that water supply early in the operation, you either weren't going to make any progress or you were going to get pulled out. Because, as Frank said, the only thing we have on the scene that puts the fire out is the water. And once we run out of that, it's game over. But what are your guys' thoughts on that, on this idea that all we need is a tank or 2 of water and that's all we need?
Yeah, it's going to fail them one day. That's what's going to happen. It's going to come and bite them 100%. I think anybody, especially in this group, we can all agree, there's no better feeling than knowing that another engine company is picking up and supplying you that water, and you have that continuous that continuous water flow to you in preparation to when it spreads and gets worse, because it will one day. It's not going to be just that bedroom. It's going to spread. You could have multiple units. You could have multiple townhouses going, and you don't want to be that person caught like that.
Yeah. What you got, Spencer?
Yeah, I mean, the majority of my fires I've been to, I put out with the tank water less than 750, but I think a lot of people, going back to what you were saying about the hydrants, they won't use it if it's 200 feet away, is they kind of have a false sense of security. So let's say they do that, booster tank, the booster tank or whatever, and they're like, oh, if we can't get with this, we're just going to hand lay it back to the hydrant. Well, how many people does it take to hand lay? How long does it take to do that? Whenever we go to fire, like you said, every fire we go to, we're initiating a water supply. We're not starting it like charging and everything, but we're initiating it so we have that fail safe. So plenty of times I've used that or laid that water supply out. It's been perfect. I haven't used much water, but on those fires where we needed that water, it only took me 15 seconds to wrap the hydrant and lay in, versus I'm on the scene and I realize, oh, I need some water. and then we're punting. We're trying to figure out what's going on because I mean, I've had my fair share of fires where I'm glad I did that, and we thought we were going to put the fire out with 100 gallons of water, and then next thing you know, it shoots in between two roofs and goes all haywire. But I look back and I imagine that, like, what if we didn't do that water supply? How would that have been? But we already had that positive water supply, and it went as good as it could. But I'm all about starting that water supply early because I can pick that line up in 5 minutes. That's no problem. But I don't want to be scrambling for that water supply when it's actually in need. So in case you got guys on upper floors and you run out of water, they're not in danger, and you're not in danger, and you can take care of business.
Yeah,
Hey,
and you've
hey,
had
Nick.
you go ahead.
I was going to add on to that for what Spencer was saying. At a minimum, let's just say it was just a bedroom, right? And they did get it with the first engine's tank water. At a minimum, if that second engine's still hooked up in supply, is that not a rep for that second engine driver? And we preach that, like, everything's a rep. You know what I mean? So at a minimum, we pack a little hose, and that second engine driver gets, or that other engine driver gets a rep out of it.
Yeah. Oh, and Spencer, you've had a couple of good fires first due in the past couple of weeks, right? And I wasn't on the house fire, unfortunately, but I saw the pictures and it looked like a lot of fire. You'd be the best judge as to whether that was a tank water fire or not, but it didn't look like it from what I saw. And then, of course, the coup de grace was the other day, Mother's Day Sunday. You guys pull up first due, 3-story garden apartment with fire, in 4 apartments on 2 floors and in the attic. And, the joint was jumping, it was ripping. And, you were, I think that we were the second company there, right? I think Rescue got there ahead of you. Rescue 2 got there ahead of you. But, the hydrant for that address was what, about 400, 400 feet away maybe or so? First, the hydrant you guys laid out for us?
It was like 300. Yeah, it was like 300.
And then so people are like, oh, well, we'll skip that. We got to get water on the fire. Well, 100%, the amount of fire you have there, flowing 1 3/4 inch, one of our 1 3/4 inch doing 175, 185 gallons per minute. 100% if you're hanging your hat on tank water there, you're running out of water. You're going to run out of water before somebody sends it to you. And I think one of the things that comes up in this conversation that I didn't really understand when all this stuff started, I guess, was, that we, and I think most of the people, the 5 of us, operate in departments where we run dedicated engine and ladder companies. And we send both to fires, and if you show up on a ladder, you do searches and vent stuff. And if you show up on an engine, you stretch hose. And very rarely do we cross that barrier. But one of the conversations that you hear in favor of the booster backup stuff stuff was that the second due company was basically being the search company. And so they didn't want to delay that company with any water supply actions because they were going to be doing the search. And I understand that. But if you're operating in a world where you have dedicated engines and ladders that arrive, in reasonable time frame to each other, you've kind of already covered that. And, I guess if you don't, and you have to rely on that second due company as being a search company rather than an engine company, then that's maybe a different kind of discussion. But do you guys have any thoughts on that? Or have you been in any of these conversations like that?
I mean, I guess if you're using your second due engine company as your search company, well, then I guess from an incident management perspective, you got to think, well, if my second due engine company is doing special service work, what's not happening, right? Where's my backup line? Where's my line to the floor above, depending on what, the SOP says. So, that's the first thing that stands out to me. But just to backtrack a little bit, he's talking about, taking the time to lay out. I think probably the easiest way to sell this, right? 15, 30 seconds tops to get out and wrap the plug and go in, right? So you can say, oh, it's 15 to 30 seconds lost. Are you going to fix a water supply issue in 15 to 30 seconds when you run out of tank water? And the answer is no.
Yeah, and I would double up on that. And another side of that I heard somebody say that made a lot of sense is that that's what this argument is about, right? Because let's just be clear. We fight every fire we go to off of tank water. We're fighting it off of tank water until the second in engine pulls up at the hydrant and charges the supply line. The only difference between what we're doing and what anybody else is talking about is that the first due engine is taking that 10 to 15 seconds to drop the dry supply line at the hydrant. We don't leave a firefighter there. We don't leave any widgets. Nobody's taking any time. I mean, it's literally, we could pull the videos up now and show people it's literally like a 12 to 15 second operation, right? And people will be like, that's right. And that's 12 to 15 seconds you're not in the building. And then you want to be like, all right, well, let's go back to where you were sitting on the sofa in the firehouse and the bell rang. And I want to analyze what you're doing between when the bell rings in the firehouse and when that charged hose line is showing up in the room of fire. And let's make sure that you're completely efficient on everything else. Because if we're
That's
at a
exactly
point,
right.
go ahead.
Those are the same guys that's the same people that say that are the same people that take 3 to 5 business days to get their mask on.
Yeah. There's always one Frankism in every call. That might be tonight. But yeah, 100%, right? Like, okay, if we're going to do that, right? If we're going to play, we don't have time to lay a line because it's all about seconds, and it's down to these. Are you telling me that you have honed in every other part of your operation so much that the last place to save time is to stop taking 15 seconds to lay a supply line that makes sure you don't run out of water, right? Exactly. Are you running to the rig when the bells ring in the firehouse? Do you know the streets in your area well enough that you're not playing with your phone or fumbling in a map book to get to an address that's 2 minutes away from your firehouse? You know what I mean? Are you coming off the rig fully dressed out with your gloves on your hand? Are your mask ups under 10 seconds? Or how's your hose line stretch look? How's the flake look? What's your backup firefighter skills of moving a charged hose line? How does all that look? Because for most departments, you're going to be able to look at that operation and you're going to be able to find other places you can save 15 seconds that need to be improved upon anyway, without dipping into the consequences of potentially not having enough water to put this fire out. Sean, what are your thoughts?
No, I mean 100%. I can't get over the fact that Frank just said 3 to 5 business days. I love it.
I said.
Speaking the truth. No, it is. You're absolutely right. Like, you have to set the standard, and that's what the citizens expect that out of you. So, I mean, there's not much more you can preach about it, man. Just you have to be ready. Put the supply line on the street every time, right? And just be ready to go to work. It pays off.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, why? I was just kind of catching up on some of the comments here, and there was definitely a lot of good discussion there. I think we kind of hit on most of that in terms of the water supply. We could sit here and talk about this water supply stuff, all night long. But how about since we're on water supply, before we get out of it, how about the rural water supply stuff? I know most of us are operating a lot of times in municipal areas, but I know here in the city and in Frederick, we go to a lot of rural fires also, and I'm not sure about where you are these days, Tim, but what are the thoughts regarding initial water supply actions in a non-hydranted area, in a rural area?
Yeah, so for us, and this kind of goes again a little bit against what we just talked about. However, I feel like there's some justification. So for us, on any driveway that exceeds 300 feet, the first engine does not lay out. The second engine lays out, and the first due tanker goes back to driveway with the intention of you're putting a lot of water at the end of the driveway as opposed to dropping a long lay. And then when it gets picked up at the end of the driveway, you're losing the bulk of it in the supply line itself. So it kind of contradicts what we just talked about, but with justification.
Yeah. Spencer, I know you deal with a lot of those kind of fires where you work and where you volunteer. I mean, what's your experience has been? What do you think kind of the best practices are?
The mission still goes with being proactive. So if you're in the rural setting and you're going down a driveway or whatever, you still need to lay that line. I don't want to be hand jacking it. I think what kills people more in the rural environment is the hose. It's that 5-inch hose because most, in the South, everybody here runs 5-inch hose. Well, that eats up so much of your water. you got to use half a tanker to fill the line before you can even use it. So I think that kills us a lot. And then also putting streams in the right place. Whenever you make a rural setting, if you're not putting it in the right place, you're wasting water. Get it to the fire and get it on there correctly, and you'll save yourself a lot of water. I can't tell you how many times I've seen people, not hitting the fire at all, and you're wasting 200 gallons a minute into a yard or something, or you're throwing it into a window that's not even on fire.
Yeah. And there's been a lot of conversation around here lately. And Frank, I know it's something I've heard you and Sean talk about a bunch before, because I think you guys use them in Frederick. But the idea of the utilization of like a clappered Siamese ahead of a drop tank. Do you want to talk about that at all, or do you guys use drop tanks? I think you initially used the clappered, right? And is there a time when you then transition to drop tanks, or what's that look like for you?
Yeah,
Someone take that one.
Yeah, so we were saying wasting water, and no better way to try and secure your water than using that clappered Siamese initially. And all of our engine companies and our tankers or tenders use or have them. And then we have a gallon per minute flow. So if a fire ground reaches 500 gallons per minute or above, then we'll start to transition from the clappered Siamese to the folding tanks. But like everybody knows, and it takes practice, and I'm sure there's a lot of companies out there, establishing those folding tanks or those dump tanks is time consuming. And we learned that in Frederick, because that used to be the only way we kind of operated in that rural setting. And it would be notorious, like, hey, we lost water, so everybody got to back out, But that clapper Siamese, that's a ball game changer right there.
It's interesting to hear you say that, because we did not have this specific of a conversation before this. And in some of the I was at a training drill in a neighboring county last week, and they're introducing this clapper thing and starting to talk about it. And like, that's almost verbatim, like the procedure that everybody started talking about. And I don't know if that means other people there already knew about, that kind of steps, or, but like the breakover, the 500 GPM, transitioning from the clapper to a dump tank kind of thing. Are you guys doing anything with putting a nurse tanker with the first due engine initially?
It follows that first engine company down the driveway. So like Frank had said, if the driveway is greater than 300 feet, that first engine doesn't lay out. They proceed down. The first arriving tanker, in theory, goes right down with it. And they don't drop anything at the end of the driveway. Not a folding tank, not a thing. They just go down there for the purpose of nursing that engine company.
And then, like, the next due engine lays the clappered?
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
So, it's kind of hard to, without a lot of hand movements, like, try to describe what the clappered Siamese is and how that works. But if you're in a rural water supply environment and you're not currently using those, that certainly seems to be something to kind of look into. So, we got a little bit ahead of ourselves there talking about some of the water supply stuff and everything. And, it was a while ago, I was trying to find his comment because I wanted to make sure I got to this, and because we probably should have started this, but like our buddy Bull, and I think all of us, been on any of the other stuff, have met Bull a couple times by now, asked the straight up question, what makes a good engine company? What is it that what's the habits or the actions, or like, what are you looking at, when you look at an engine company to say those guys are either game on, or, hopefully we get somebody else? What are you thinking, Frank?
Just hustle. To sum it up in one word, hustle, right? But to elaborate on that, they're getting off the wagon, buttoned up, ready to go, moving with a purpose, and knowing what that purpose is. Like, they're not moving with a purpose doing laps around the fire engine. They're pulling the line that their officer, the officer's got their nose in the computer or the map book as they're going down the road. They know the complex, they know the neighborhood, would tell you, hey, we're 150, 300, 400, whatever line you're running. They got it off, they're yanking it, it's on the way. The officer bolts doing their 360. And that entire evolution from the time the brake pops to the time they're starting to get through that front door, 30 seconds, 1 minute tops. right? It's not a bunch of like standing around like, all right, what do we do? Do we want to go this way? Do we want to go that way? What are you doing? I don't know what I'm doing. You know what I mean? It's worked out long before the bells ever went off.
Yeah, and I'll add on to that before I forget, and then I'll bounce it to you, Tim, because I know you've had similar experiences. I got to tell you, there was never a time in my life when I was more, I don't know if nervous or pensive is the right word, than being the officer, being really any of the crew members on the engine at Kentland. Really, I mean, I always thought officer was particularly stressful because I had to get dressed quick. I had to be in the map book and find the hydrant, especially if it was outside of the first due or something like that. Whereas the driver just kind of had to get us there and the lineman, just had to get dressed. But particularly as the officer, I just felt very stressed out because I don't feel like I've never been able to find the words to describe to people how fast-paced that environment is. And anybody who thinks they know how fast-paced it is, but hasn't ever operated in that area, you do not know how fast-paced it is. It is mind-blowingly. And I just mean, what Frank is talking about. I mean, they used to dispatch box alarms by saying the address first. So they would say at number 1234 Main Street, and people in the county knew the addresses so much to know, oh, we don't run, it's at number 5. Oh yeah, we don't have any unit block addresses, not us. Or 10,584. And people are moving. Like, people would know whether they were probably on the box just by hearing the numbers for the address. And I mean, just everybody, the engine would be out the door in 15 seconds, 15, 20 seconds most. Anytime I was riding the engine, I slept on the sofa, in the day room, because it was only 10 feet away from the engine. Because if I slept in my bunk, I probably wouldn't make it. That's how fast this stuff was moving. And people just knew where they were going. Everybody memorized their district. They studied their streets. They knew their buildings. They knew their apartment complexes. They would know where the hydrants were certainly without looking at a phone. That technology wasn't even there yet. And almost always without looking in a map book. They just knew where they were. If it was in your first due, you just knew it. It was memorized. And to think how quick that just made your deployment. I mean, I think some people these days probably can't even process how quick that made it. We'd be pulling up, and if we had a layout firefighter, a fourth firefighter, they'd be dropping the line. If we're riding 3, the nozzleman would drop the line. This is back in the day when you could do some things you can't always get away with here. But there was a thing that even if we were riding 4 on the engine, one of the things we always knew is that most of the time, if you were going to a house, it was the bumper line, 150. If you were going to an apartment, it was either the 250 or the 400. And the 250 and the 400 were off the back. And so a lot of times, if you were running the line, if you were the nozzleman, even if you had a layout man, you'd tell the layout man that you would lay out. Hey, I got it, I'll lay out. And because then what we would do is we'd drop the line, we'd ride the tailboard. We'd ride the tailboard during the layout for the 200 to 500 feet, whatever it was, because then you were, when the wagon stopped, you were right there next to the 250 or the 400, and before the officer was at the back of the tailboard, you were off with your stretch. Just everybody knew, what lines to take. They knew the buildings. The skills were dialed in. And I mean, you want to talk about getting in arguments about saving time, and getting water on the fire quick. Let's go back to that time then, because there were no seconds lost. And not only, was it very challenging, it was very fun, and it's 100% the background of my fire service career. And at this point, I've been in the fire department for 30 years in 7 different states. And I have not found any environment that is remotely as fast-paced as it was there. Of course, Salisbury is a very, very close second, Spencer. But we're challenged by some of the newer rules in society, I guess. But Tim, what would you add to that? Am I off or what?
So, the biggest things are knowing your first due, knowing your box alarm district, first and foremost, your driver, you as the boss, and then the firemen as well. It's very nice, but it's about getting out quick. It's about knowing where you're going. It's about knowing the running routes, what streets to take, what street has, more stop signs, what street has more speed bumps. Hey, can we go another block down this major road? Cut down one road, make a right, make a left, and make another left, and it actually saves us time rather than going straight down a road with a bunch of speed bumps, right? That's a good start. You have to know your area. You have to know your box alarm district. And I say box alarm district, meaning wherever you may run as a company in that entire area, not just your first two. Then we transition to pulling lines every day, knowing what lines can reach where. The morning stretch, that's great. That helps get the reps, right? But then still going out there and pulling lines as a drill during the day is awesome. But you also have to get creative. It's not always going to be the 200-foot cross lay from the street to the front door. There's going to be cars in the way. It's going to be an apartment. You have to get comfortable with thinking outside the box. Looks like a box alarm
Got
for
one.
Spencer.
I'm checking the CAD right now. As soon as I saw him put his bunker pants on,
But
fire alarm.
it's more than just pulling a regular line. You need to know what your engine carries. Listen, we all have worked in departments where we can't control exactly how a rig is set up. But you can't use that as a crutch. You have to get out there and drill and make the engine work for you rather than you work for it. So knowing where you're going, knowing what lines to pull, we could sit here and say, hey, how far does a 200-foot cross lay get us? Oh, well, it gets us 200 feet. Cool. If I'm standing here, can you tell me how far away that front door is? Is it 78 feet? Is it 125? So understanding how to estimate stretches, how far apart are parking spots, how far apart are the driveways in certain neighborhoods. You can get out there and you can learn all that so that when you arrive and you want to leave space for a ladder truck on side Alpha, you can actually stop short. You don't always have to pull past like everybody's talking about. You can stop short and the truck company can come around the block and now they're not blocked out. It's a wild concept, guys.
I hear you, brother.
But the biggest thing with Kentland, I rode the Sea of the Wagon for many years, and it was just about knowing the addresses, knowing the numbers, knowing what side of the road is the even side and odd side. Just understanding what you can do with your engine and building lines and how to build lines. Not relying on, the gated Y theory on longer stretches. And we can go back to the Andy Frederick, the fire goes as the first line goes. The quicker you get a line in service and water on the fire, the better the outcome will be.
Yeah, I think there's so much in that, because the engine company is a basic thing, right? I mean, it's go to fire, make sure you have a water supply, stretch an attack line, put fire out. I mean, it's a much more singular task than truck operations. You know what I mean? But obviously, the whole reason we do any truck operations is because the building's on fire, and the only person that solves that is the engine company. And that's why it's the backbone of the fire service. And there's so many details in there. I mean, just like as you were saying that, I remember so many things about all the little phrases that we would have memorized to identify like where buildings were in an apartment complex, right? And what you went off of Evart Street and what you went off of Hamlin Street for. That's a real throwback now. But all that kind of stuff. And I wonder sometimes if that's stuff that people even think about anymore. Sean and Frank, I think Frederick has a very strong engine culture. I mean, are these the conversations going on there, or do people still talk about this stuff these days, in the area, or what?
Yeah, for sure. I do think the invention of technology, and you'll get a kick out of this since you always ride me about being technology illiterate. Technology has made lazy firefighters. And they want to rely on the maps on their telephone or the maps on the MDT if their wagons have those. And like everything technology, it fails, right? Or may not work as desired. So committing it to memory, getting out in the area, like that's still very, very important, right? And I think that's probably one of the things. Like I don't want to say it's bad around here, but it absolutely does happen around here. But just getting out in the area, you can't beat that. What you see with your own eyes and compute with your own brain is far more beneficial than anything I've ever done on a computer. Right? The computer won't tell you topography. The computer won't tell me that there's a 12-foot chain link fence between this address and that address. Things like that. That you see with your own eyes. You can drive a street 100 times and then you walk it on foot one time and you'll see whatever you missed.
Yeah. I just had it up there. One of our other engine captains, had a great observation. I mean, talk about making lemonade out of lemons. Like, you get assigned to go do hydrant testing today. You could look at that as, well, that sucks, or you could just look at, man, I'm about to know in detail the location of 20 fire hydrants. You know what I'm saying? And, that makes me think, kind of going back to, some other things that I've seen in my career. I mean, certainly I feel like any fire that I ever drove the wagon or in any box, even if it wasn't a working fire, if I drove and we laid out at that hydrant, I remember where that hydrant is. You just have a much more personal connection with it. And, if you expand that to just simple practices, like what if every medical call, CO alarm, whatever, every call you went to, before you left the call, I mean, go handle the emergency, but before you leave the call, you stop with the guys and you identify, all right, guys, where's the hydrant for where we just were? And if the room we were just in was on fire, what line would you take? And if you just did that, what's that going to take? 60 seconds? You know what I'm saying? And you did, and especially if you're on a company that's doing 10 or 20 runs a day, if you just use those opportunities to kind of learn your district and just be into the game, how much better of a firefighter does that make you when you're first due? I mean, we all know, like, when you're driving in particular and the bells ring, you're about to have either one of two sensations. You hear the address and you're like, got it. You know what I mean? Or you hear the address and you're like, oh shit, where the F is that? And those are two completely different driving experiences. You know what I'm saying? I think you know which one you want to have. So, I mean,
Well,
I was never
especially,
good at it. Frank, you're apparently another one of these, map wizards that just like some people might read a magazine, you read like an old ADC street book. You know what I mean? But that was never my skill set. Like I could do it to the degree that I needed to, but there were certainly some people, in our firehouse, in our career, that like they would just, they just knew every address, every street, could draw you a stick map, of the entire box alarm district and label every hydrant. But, it's not the most exciting thing, but it's something you got to engage in.
yeah, for sure. Like when I was a wagon driver and I was fortunate enough to do that for 6 or 7 years. And yeah, that was something I took very seriously. My downtime in the firehouse, I had my nose in the book, making sure, like Spray 9 said, not only the first due area, but my first alarm area, right? And for those that have the competitive spirit, that's a great way to hurt a lot of people's feelings when you know their area better than they do.
Hey, I'll say as a whether it's a covering officer, a detail officer, a floating officer, whatever you call yourself, there's no better feeling than climbing up in that engine company and you having that experienced wagon driver like, hey boss, I know where that plug is. It's right there on the corner of this street and that street. I got it. My man. Yeah. I might verify it, but that's
yeah, trust but verify.
I tell a story. I mean, I remember I was a sergeant on 27 engine in DC, and we were going to a first due fire one day, and for forever the DC engines didn't have any kind of mapping device in them. I mean, certainly no computers. They didn't even have map books. You know what I mean? You just had to memorize the city. That's what you did. and that's how you tested to become a technician. Well, anyway, about the time I was a sergeant, they started getting the mobile data terminals. So now there was a computer in the rig, and that computer had a mapping function. And since I'm a nerd, one day we're going to this box, I'd finished getting dressed out, and I'm over on the new computer, and I like switch to the map screen, and I start yelling to the wagon driver, like, hey, it looks like, they got a hydrant on the corner of 49th and dude, I mean, I swear to God, the guy reached over and he slammed the computer screen closed on my hand. And then he made complete eye contact with me while we're still driving. We're still going. Makes complete eye contact with me. And he says, I'm not an effing moron. I know my district. Now shut up and blow the siren. Okay.
Sir.
But I mean, most people that have grown up in these cultures, would I be wrong to say that in a lot of firehouses, the technician or the wagon driver ran the company? The officer might blow the siren and do the paperwork, but the driver ran the company. Is that a thing?
I think in the good ones, yeah.
I mean, as an officer, don't you want that? I mean, once you promote past that rank, I mean, don't you kind of see even more how like I want that. I want that strong driver that's taken that role and kind of taken that XO, that executive officer role, running that company.
Yeah, sure, man. I got a Kelly day. I go on vacation, so having taken great comfort when I'm not there, things are running as they should. Even with a covering officer, like the guy to the left of him is the man, you know what I mean? So,
yep.
Yeah, it goes without saying, like if you got a strong senior man or strong wagon driver, it pays dividends in more ways than one.
Well, it looks like we've got a live update from the field here. Spencer, can you tell us what we've got?
I don't know what we're talking about, but this was just a fire alarm for the first dude. And my new guy's first shift tonight, so we got him a stretch, and we'll be packed in like 3 minutes.
My man.
Look at
that. Best training you can get. I'm going to get back to that, and I'll be back on.
All right, buddy.
Haters will say it's Photoshopped.
Haters will say that.
Man, that'd be the
Frank
next
is
level
dropping them left and right.
But yeah, I mean, that's the thing. So I don't know if you couldn't hear what he was saying. Spencer's working tonight. He's the captain on Engine 3, and they just ran a first due fire alarm. And he has a new probationary firefighter that's in his first days on the company. And one of the things, it is not required per se in our department that an engine stretch on an automatic fire alarm. But if they do, I'm gonna give him a golf clap and I'm gonna help him pack the hose. You know what I'm saying? No harm, no foul. So since he's got a new guy on there, you talk about easy drills you can do as one company. You run a fire alarm and you got a new firefighter in the back or a guy that hasn't stretched in a while, have him stretch the line. What's the cost? They'll be back in service in 3 minutes.
Yep. Hey, I was going to say that going back to your comment, Nick, that, this is no surprise. As a company officer, there's times that the administrative duties are out there, right? So you might have to tackle that. And I'll go back to saying this. Again, there's no better feeling than coming out in the engine bay and seeing that technician or that wagon driver putting a drill on. They're stretching, right? That's when there's the benchmark that you have a good engine company right there.
Yeah. 100%. So, along those lines, we've mentioned it a couple times, different drills and stuff. What were your go-to drills, or what are your go-to drills, related to this engine company stuff, particularly as either an individual member of the company or as just, one engine company drilling by itself? What are kind of some of your go-to things?
I like one that I didn't implement. I actually took the idea from another shift, but at the time we were a 3-person engine company. So if we're a 3-person engine company, who's the backup firefighter in this role? Without a doubt, the officer, right? But we have to have appreciation of that position because that position never gets all the glory, right? So hose line management was a big one to me. So I would find a way to create some type of stretch where there was a bunch of 90-degree turns, right? And put people in that role as a backup firefighter and doing that hose line management, because that's a big key right there.
Yeah, 100%. And even around the firehouse, it's not hard to find an environment where you can set that up, right?
Real
Frank,
simple.
how about you?
Yeah, so just I'll keep it really simple, like individualized drills or drills you don't even have to break a sweat for. But you're masking up with gloves on. You could do that in the back of the bay, no problem. Another one that I used to do that kind of contributes to this was at lineup, take the logbook and go through every street for every call they've ran since our last shift, and get me there. And then if you want to turn it up a notch, take it and go give me the run route from the firehouse to this call. Now give me the run route from this call's address to the next one. So not even always from the firehouse.
Bro, you're speaking in that's like physics or something at that point, isn't it? That's
Now they're good at it. They get good at it.
that I like. So not only get me to every run since our last shift, but get me from run to run. That's next level, because that really puts you thinking. Like, it's a lot easier to think from that starting point of the firehouse. But yeah, okay, so now we're out on the road. We're at the grocery store. We're clearing another run. Like, plotting that route in your head is an entirely different animal. I like that one.
And,
How
and my
about
last assignment,
go ahead.
we were in a house with a medic unit that covered some ground, man. So they were getting some streets way off the beaten path.
Oh, you include the medic unit on that?
Oh,
Dang.
absolutely, absolutely. Why not?
No mercy.
Yeah,
Tim, what about you? You're on the back step these days, right? So what are you thinking?
You start with the basic hose line management, rig to door. That's always big, especially for newer guys in the service, building bundles off spare hose in the bay. From there, like Sean said, hose line management inside, working on corners, making loops. But then drills I like to do is expand the mindset. Lines over ladders for companies that have apartments in their first dues, hotels, anything like that. Rope stretches. Taking the taking the shoulder load all the way up and doing a coupling drop. You know, to really expand people's mindset on what we can do with our attack lines, and then also building lines. Coming from Kentland, we had the 650, which with a 3-man company, we could run 650 feet of inch and a half in no time, because we understood the concept of building a line. So I like to bring that, anywhere I've been, I like to bring it to them, because a lot of them don't even have a 300, let alone 400 foot line on their companies. So taking the bumper line and building it into the cross lane, making a 350 foot line, having everyone understand that concept and the why behind it is the most important, especially for the rural parts of, say, Horry County, where I was. A lot of people are like, well, why do we need a 300 foot line or a 400 foot line now in the rural setting? Well, there's many times where you can't make it all the way down a driveway, or you have an outbuilding to the rear of a house on fire. Yeah, the go-to is, let's take this 2.5 to a gated Y that no one's used to pulling, and let's put it out in the yard and finally get water after about 6 or 7 minutes. Or let's build a line and have water on the fire from the time we pull the brake to flowing water on the fire in about 2 minutes at most.
Yeah. Yeah, I 100%. I think, what you kind of hit on there with kind of just thinking beyond the cross lay, so to speak, whether it's, building lines out of other lines, or whether it's doing alternate stretches like, the rope stretch, lines over ladders, coupling drop, all that kind of thing. The apartment fire that, Spencer was first due on a week ago, I mean, we stretched, I think, at least 2 lines via coupling drops and another one via rope stretch. And that might not be something you do every day, but when you need to do it, whether you've practiced or not, is really going to show itself, right?
Right.
So
And just real quick on the rope drop, I know here in Horry County recently there was an apartment fire, and the company has talked about it multiple times about doing a rope drop. Well, they pull up a fire showing from the third floor and through the roof, and the first in company officer grabbed the rope, went up to the third floor, dropped it, and it was seamless because they've talked about it so much.
Yeah, some of that is so overlooked. Like, I mean, how quickly, at the right scenario, executing a stretch like that, how much faster that can get a line in service, and how with how much less hose is just mind blowing, right? So, one thing that's kind of come up a bunch, I know some people asked about it in the comments and sent us some messages and everything about it, was, operating in this low staffed engine company. And Sprayna, I'm pretty sure, for years you were on a 2-person engine company, right? And then I think everybody here has spent substantial time operating on a 3-person engine company, driver, officer, firefighter. So, let's kind of talk about, some of those workflows, or how did you make that happen, or what tips would you give somebody in a new position dealing with that? So, Sean, I know you kind of mentioned it a little bit earlier, so kind of just start with you.
Yeah, so I mean, if you're that new officer and you're in that role of a 3-person engine company, I think really comes down to starting to figure this out is at that table, right? And then holding that discussion, talking about different scenarios, and then implementing it right afterwards, and just going through, trying to figure out what works best for you. Is it the wagon driver? If we're doing a 500 or the 300. Is it just the firefighter able to do that? In theory, should be, right? Or is the wagon driver going to help you while that officer conducts a 360 and then links back up with you? And it's just getting out to those different building types, out in your first due, and just implementing what you have discussed at the firehouse table to see if those theories work, and then go with it. And then just continue to practice it until you have it down.
Yeah. So how do you balance that then? And Frank, I'll kind of bounce it to you on this little here is somebody said it earlier, when you're on a 3-person engine company, the officer is functionally the backup firefighter. Though also that's what we would think. I have talked to people and I've seen operations where when they're doing a 3-person operation, the officer has the nozzle and the firefighter is doing the backup stuff. So I don't know if you have any thoughts on that, but how do how would you operate in that 3-person crew environment, and how do you deal with that kind of like, that the officer's got to play both sides, got to play the backup, and the company officer role?
Yeah, so I think just real quick, and I want to expand on something that Sean said. I think it's commonly overlooked, especially on these shorter staffed engine companies. Like, the wagon driver is a key component in a lot of these stretches, right? And I think for some people that's a taboo concept when it shouldn't be, right? Like, they're in street clothes 9 times out of 10, way more ambulatory than somebody in gear, and can absolutely help with that, whether it's from the wagon to the door, or depending on the depth of the complex, or whatever level it's on, they can get you into the stairwell even a little bit, right? So don't forget your wagon driver as a player in the equation. As far as from the company officer perspective, where you're the bar man, you're the backup man, you're the unit officer, at times the division supervisor. Yeah, you got your hands full, right? So it's one of those things: jack of all trades, a master of none. But for me, what I found to be the most advantageous playing that backup role was bring as much with me as I could on the way wherever we're going, right? So whether you're grabbing that coupling, and just dragging it behind, trying to keep up with your guy, that's kind of a little bit stressful sometimes when you have, you got a newer guy on a tip, and you're 15 to 20 foot behind. It never really gave me the warm and fuzzies, right? So just getting, grabbing a loop in the hose or whatever, bringing it with you, putting a couple loops together and shoving them down a hallway, whatever the case may be. But just bringing it with you, right? Because if you're on top of the guy and you're making your advance, and then you come up short, and now you got to retreat 20, 30, 50 feet to bring some more back, like that never made me feel really good, right? So bring as much with you as you can. As far as stretching dry lines, we talk about that from time to time. Not a huge advocate of it. To me, if like you got to be on air, then you need to have water in your line. So you can get away with it as long as you can, but if you got to go on air, then you need to tell the wagon driver let the water go.
Yeah, and a couple. You said a bunch of kind of good things there, and I think one thing about the wagon driver, is let's just look at what this guy's supposed to do. Right? They're supposed to charge the attack line. So, I think most of us know that we shouldn't charge the attack line until the attack line is flaked out and ready to be charged. And so therefore, what value is this person standing at the pump panel going, looks like those guys are struggling, can't pull this lever yet. You know what I'm saying? Like, and so to your point, both at Kentland and in the district, it would not be uncommon at all for the driver to be helping stretch, the longer lines, the 300 or 400 foot line. And I mean, I remember them being in the stairwell in the apartment building. If the fire was on the 4th floor, you might see that driver on the 2nd floor flaking out line. They're not shirking their job. They're not in an IDLH environment. They're not freelancing. It's just that that guy can't pull the lever until that hose is flaked out. So we can either waste time and wait for the lower manpower to struggle to do that by themselves, or that driver can go and assist with that. And you look at that as that's where I always talk about that driver having the responsibility from that rig to the door, or in some cases expanding that a little bit to like the rig to wherever it is you have to put your mask on. You know what I mean? In some other buildings, you got to take a little bit more license with that. But
I think it's also important to note that wagon driver, in the words of Frank Malta, is hustling, right? So running the line with you and then hustling out to get back to the wagon. But more importantly, on the way out, he's making sure there's no kinks, that it's a clean stretch. You know what I mean? And then getting to the wagon and doing the rest.
Yeah, you're kind of getting two passes. You're getting the pass on the way up, and then you're getting the pass on the way back. Yep. Tim, what would you add to all that?
All right, so I do have a bunch of years operating on 2-man engine company. Sometimes we get a third, which is awesome. I acted as the driver. I also acted as the officer many times. The biggest thing is consistency. If you're going to have someone that might be riding as your third one day, cool, that's extra help. But make sure when you're operating with 2, it's fluid. And when that third person comes along, you don't have to really change a whole lot up. Maybe just who's pulling the hand line at that point are you only changing up. So when we're talking about like water supply, for me it was always the driver, right? Because they are dressed down. A lot of times I've ran into issues where, you add that third person on who's usually newer. They're riding the back step. They're trying to figure out how to put their gear on, or if it's on correctly. But now we want them to lay the supply line, and that just causes a whole headache, right? So get fluid with your 2 people. And then, we're talking about just the workflows, and the driver operator is huge, right? Being a part of stretching that line, whether it's off the front bumper, cross lay, off the back, following up like you guys were talking about, to where they're watching the hose getting flaked out. Awesome. Now I know that when I get back to the rig, I can charge it. Now, operating with only 2 guys, there's a lot of departments that are real big on 2 in, 2 out. Additional companies are arriving. You're having other companies fill in to help manage that line. But a big thing is a lot of company officers like to sit there and say, well, I'm a company officer, I need to be supervising. And if we're talking about supervising, you go back to all the firefighter 1, fire officer 1, fire officer 2 stuff. Span of control is what, 3 to 7? So if you're on a 2-man rig, who the hell are you actually supervising? You're not even in that span of control window yet.
More like the buddy system at that point.
Right? So it's important to just get out of that mindset. This is not the FDNY. I know a lot of people want it to be, but the FDNY is very big on that officer being a supervisor. Listen, when you're running 2 or 3-man engine companies, you're not just a supervisor. You're part of the workforce. You need to. That's a mental game that we have to get into, and we have to get good at doing our jobs. That's not just riding in the front seat, telling people where to go, how to write a report. That's being efficient at pulling lines, pulling them to the right places. As the officer, you have a lot on your plate. Well, you signed up for that. You get paid more to do what a fireman does plus more. So as an officer, you have to be in that mindset, and you have to know you have to be willing to work with everybody. You have to be able to stretch hose, hands on hose, right? And that driver operator has to get very good at making sure lines flaked out from the rig to the door. And you bring it all up with you, because there's nothing worse than getting down the hallway and you only have about 10 more feet to go to make that last room and put that fire out. And you are stretched tight from the door to the fire room. You go out to the front, you look through the front yard, and the front yard just looks like it's tight. But on the other side of the engine, there's about 30 feet of hose left. And if you would have just brought that all up with you, you'd be able to make that fire room.
Yeah, 100%. You're 100% right. Bring it up with you, But I also, it just makes me think how many times I've been frustrated because, somebody's telling you we're out of line, and then you're like, oh, we'll see about that, and you go back and you go and chase it, and you find, 5 foot lost because it's the wrong way around a chair over here, and then the coupling caught on the door frame cost you 10 feet over here. There's still 10 feet left on the other side of the engine. You're like, man, we weren't even close to out of line. Like you said, step one, bring it with you. But if you're going back and you're looking for more lines, somebody's got to chase that line from the nozzle to the pump panel, and make sure that every inch of line is done. Because there is nothing worse than being 6 inches or 6 feet from making the turn to be able to finish putting out the fire. So Spencer, welcome back. I see we got back from the run all right, which is good because that means I didn't miss a fire. But what we're kind of talking about was kind of that workflow of that 3-person engine company, and kind of how you make that work, because you're really kind of short at least one, right? Ideally inside the building, he's got the driver outside, and ideally inside the building you'd have a captain, a firefighter, and a backup firefighter. But when it's just a firefighter and the officer inside of the building, we got a couple of different things going on. So can you kind of talk a little bit about, like your workflow on Engine 3? Like, how do you make that work? What lessons have you learned? What works? What doesn't work? What's going on there?
Yeah. Usually if it's like a 300-foot stretch or less, I'm not involved with the stretch. I'm worried about my lap and all that, and usually they know where to go. If we're stretching 300 or more, like if we're getting to a 400, 450 or something like that, then I'm hands-on in the stretch, which kind of takes me out of the 360 early on. But I'll usually take a position like on the second shoulder load, so whenever it runs out, I break off, and I go complete my lap and all that, and hopefully I meet back up with them while they're getting that done. And then as far as like moving, I don't know how much y'all have talked about this already, but as far as moving hose in the building, yeah, I'm the slack guy now. So I'm doing officer things, I'm doing slack guy things, and then if I'm the first to do engine and you're not there or another chief's not there, then I'm division. So I'm doing 3 jobs, which is, that's a lot to handle, because like you were talking about the fire the other day on Mother's Day, is 3-story garden apartment. I didn't help out with the stretch, but I still had to make the rear, come back around, get up to the fire floor, tell them where to go, put my mask on. I dipped into the apartment that was on fire, saw the conditions there, pulled them up on my tick, told my nozzleman to flow, get that apartment cooled down. Nobody else was really up there with us, so I actually had to break off, go out the door to the next apartment, force the door on that apartment, found the same conditions in there. It was on fire as well. So to shut the door, and then thankfully another engine was showing up. I told them to go in there and put that fire out. And by that time, my nozzleman's going in, and I feed him a little bit of line. And I was 30 feet behind him on that fire, and then all of a sudden I was 30 feet in front of him. I made the rear into the hallway, going past the laundry room and all that, and then we found the fire up the back of the building, and then I had to run back again, get another loop for him, and push him up in there. And then by that time we were putting the fire out, and then we were by ourselves for a little bit. So I actually hopped on the nozzle just for a second to get my guy breath, and I put a little bit of fire out and then handed it back to him. And then on top of that, the back deck was not very good, so I had to run inside, snag a door, throw it on the deck for stability, jumped on it, worked out great. And I guess y'all's conditions improved up there because you were above us, and I was trying to keep y'all nice and cool.
Yeah, yeah. I'm sure it didn't hurt your feelings to get that nozzle for a second or so, though. But
No.
but yeah, I mean, it's like being a ping pong ball, and then you know going to the next level with it. We go to these, we go around and we teach and we talk to departments, and one of the most common things we find when we talk about the command stuff is that a lot of places are really understaffing their first due alarm. They're not sending enough engines, and then the limited number of engines they're sending don't have enough people. Like we have 3 people on our engines, but we send 5 of them. You know what I mean? So that helps. If you've got 3 people on your engines and you're sending 2 of them, you talk about being a ping pong ball. You know what I'm saying? Like you're going to be you're going to be in a pinball machine there, and it just takes people to do work. So I mean, a lot of different challenges there and everything. So yeah, I mean, I think that's something a lot of people deal with. You guys have anything else to add on that, or?
Using the as far as we operate, that second due engine arriving obviously is what we call the fast, and they're kind of like what I like to call the free safety company. They kind of like go to the line, make sure it's good, and then the officer, whoever, will break away, throw ladders with OVs and stuff like that. But you still have to be able to break away if something happens. But just having that nozzle guy on the second engine go to the door, that is like huge, because I don't have to go back to the door now. I don't have to go back to the door and get hosed. I can stay up with my guy in case if something goes wrong, if fire comes around us, I'm there with him instead of me being far away.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's, I mean, for those that aren't familiar, I mean, that's something that our department does is, it's a long story, but the second in engine in our department picks up the hydrant. So they stop the engine at the hydrant where the first due laid from. The driver stays with the rig and sends the water. The officer and the firefighter go up, and the officer and firefighter, have to basically be the initial RIT team. And, the way we make the best of that is that the firefighter in particular on that second due engine basically becomes the backup firefighter for the first due engine. So they're at the door. They're not supposed to go in the IDLH, but they're at the door, moving line, chasing kinks, all that kind of stuff. And a lot of times that is a big help to that first due engine.
It's huge
until extra help gets there. Yeah. And before anybody else asks, while that's happening, other companies are arriving. We are dedicated engine and truck city. So, having that second due engine be that initial RIT team is not always ideal, but we also have ladder companies and heavy rescue company that's arriving and is also doing that search kind of stuff. So what you got, Frank?
So on that note, right, and maybe a little bit of a touchy subject, but understanding that the truck and the squad, they have their assignments. But if you're making your way up the steps and you acknowledge that the engine's having a tough time making the stretch, take a couple seconds and help them get the line in place. All right, because wherever it is you're headed, you ain't staying there long if they're not getting water on the fire, right? So just help you or help them help you is essentially what I'm trying to get at here. It's not taboo for the truck guy maybe to grab one and take it with them or whatever. And some of them I think they're better than that, but whatever.
Yeah, no, 100%. I mean, it kind of goes back to something we were talking about earlier. Is like, you have this, battle about, fire attack, which can include water supply, and search, and obviously the number one priority of everything is to save savable lives, right? And fire attack and therefore water supply participate in that by controlling the fire. But sometimes we lose sight of the fact that while the search is probably the most important thing that happens there, I'm probably not the only person on in this conversation that's been driven out of their search because we lost the fire. You know what I'm saying? And it's going to be real hard to finish that primary or to finish removing the victim when you get overrun by fire conditions because we didn't get a line in place because a coupling was hung up on the steps and nobody did anything, or because, we didn't treat water supply properly and we ran out of water. You're not going to finish the search now, and anybody else that's in there is condemned to a real sad situation, So a good question I think comes up. This kind of just popped up in here. particularly regarding this, lower staffed engine company, do you carry a tool with you as the engine officer, particularly if you're on, a low staffed engine company? What are you guys carrying with you?
Yes, I used to carry a bar with me. So one hand on the line, bar in one hand. If I needed to, put a little bit more on the line, I would take the bar and just slam the spike through the drywall and hang it on the wall where I can find it again, and pull the line and then resume.
Yeah. Spencer, I think you kind of carry the same thing, don't you? Or they just
hang
got
on,
it,
let
or
me.
they just got another run.
No, I was cutting the air compressor off so you could hear me.
Oh,
Uh,
you carry a
yeah,
bar also, don't you?
I'm the same way. A small, versatile tool is what we call it, what we need to carry. But really, realistically, a 30-inch bar is paramount. Like that's the best thing. You can do anything with it. Force doors, take windows or whatever. I'm not going to carry a 3-foot closet hook. Yeah, I mean, I might be able to pull some drywall down, but I'm not going to be able to pull that drywall down if I can't get through a door, you know. So a 30-inch bar is my tool of choice, and then obviously my tick, and then to go along with the bar, I got a couple of wedges to help with that. That's my tool choice.
Yeah, and I mean, as a lot of people know these days, not that I would want to leave the axe on the fire truck, but until the irons firefighter gets there, there's a lot of doors you can get through with that bar and a metal wedge. So Sean
I'll
and
tell you
Tim,
another.
you guys carrying kind of the same thing, or?
I'll let Frank go real quick. I think he was about
No,
to
I was
ask
just
something.
like going on. He said, talking about like the hook, short hook or whatever. As an engine company officer, I bet you I've hooked more steel with a Halligan bar than I ever have with a hook.
I've seen him on couches and tables and everything else. Just
I'm a little guy.
No, I'm the same. I'm the same. It's a bar, and then the thermal's hooked on my SCBA. So yeah, that's usually my go-to.
Have you guys seen this new fad? I credit it to one of our guys on rescue, but who knows where he got it from, about clipping the thermal imager on the back of your air pack, like on the frame. Are you guys
Yeah,
doing
we've
that?
seen
Do you
it.
like it, or?
There's a couple guys that are doing it. I mean, I think as long as you're disciplined, I mean, I think some of these guys forget it's back there. Yeah. Or
I've
we've
been
had. I
I've
have.
been
I
doing it.
have.
I like it.
I saw a picture of somebody, like, you just got to use a little bit of sense with it. They had clipped it somewhere where it essentially occluded the universal air connection. So like, you gotta use a little bit of sense if you're gonna do it, and then remember it's back there.
Yep. Yep.
Yeah, I think it's application too. As me being the officer on the line, I like to have my tick with me quick. So I mean, I can just grab it on my front side, pull it up. I think it really benefits more on the OV side if you're rolling over window seals, because we had that auto shot fire like last year or something. I went over a parapet with my tick on the front and ripped it off. But if I'd have had it back there, that would have made sense. But I think it's more beneficial to the OV guys, the drivers that are VSing and stuff like that.
Yeah, I got into it because I went through like this thing, last year or something, where I just was like looking at my front at a fire, and I'm like, I got way too many pieces of
You
flare.
look like
You
a
know what I'm saying?
Christmas tree.
There's way too much shit up here. You know what I'm saying? Like, I just felt like I couldn't move, and so I kind of like really really reevaluated like what was on my front torso, and the thermal imager was one of them, and just trying to clear up my ability to move around freely on a fire and everything. But we were talking about it, so I just thought I'd ask everybody's thoughts on that. Tim, what are your thoughts on all this?
Like everyone else said, the Halligan bar, Frank, nothing better than getting on a bed or a dresser, pulling that ceiling down. Now, and if you got to pull a lot of ceiling to get to the attic, you jump on top of a dresser, you make yourself a hole, you pull yourself up, you start kicking the rest of the ceiling down. Right? That's the easiest way to get it done. Or you do that, and then you go over to the other room. You tell that other engine company, "Yo, it's getting hot up here. Let me get your line." They hand it to you. Their boss gets all pissed off because they just gave their line to the other company. Uh, but every fire is different. You might pull up to it's an obvious attic or cockwall fire. You know, you can grab a 6-foot hook and bring it with you to open up the ceiling to get to the fire quickly, right? You just have to be open-minded with that, but 99.5% of the time, yeah, Halligan bar and a tick all day.
Yeah. And I mean, well, what you kind of just said reminded me, actually, when I worked in Fairfax City for a minute, one of the workflows that they had there is that it was kind of the first place I saw it, I guess, that once we got the initial stretch done and everything, the driver would, clear the yard and everything like we've been talked about. And then what they would grab a couple of 6-foot hooks and they'd bring them up and put them on the hinge side of the front door. So, if the truck wasn't there yet or you needed a hook, it was there, but it was out of your way, and so, other guys, a lot of times they're smart enough to know, hey, we got an attic fire, 9.5 out of 10, somebody at some point is going to call for an attic ladder. So let me grab that and bring that up to the front door. And that's just kind of some of the stuff, a good proactive driver, should be looking at or should be thinking about.
Hey, I'll add on to that, and it was the expectations of the engine driver. Once the hose line was charged and they got a water supply, this is a big Frank Malta thing. There's two things typically on this engine company called, there's ladders on there that could be thrown. So why not if you can? And then another thing is I would have my engine driver, hey, bring an attic ladder and put it by the front door, because at some point in time, someone's going to call for the attic ladder. And then, God forbid, if someone goes through a floor, maybe, just maybe, I could deploy that and hopefully get to them,
Yeah.
It's just a thought. Put it by the front door.
Yeah, 100%. So, well, I think we've had some great conversation, and obviously, the engine company, I mean, all these different things, Frank, like you said before we went live, like, any one of these bullet points could be its own show. So, if anybody, if there's something you really want to hear us kind of talk about or dive in on a little deeper on an upcoming show, please drop it in the comments, or even better, send me an email. We appreciate everybody tuning in. I hope you guys got some good things to think about, got some good motivation for when you get in the firehouse next day. But I think the message is clear. Like, one of the things I was always told coming up on an engine company is that if you want to call yourself a professional firefighter, whether you're getting paid or whether you're a volunteer, doesn't matter. If you're a professional firefighter working on an engine company, there should be no way that you show up to the firehouse and don't stretch hose every day. Whether it's on a reported box alarm, whether it's at a training, or even better, if it's at a fire. Football players go to football camp and every day they throw the football, and that's how you win the Super Bowl. And we got to look at that, this way is stretching a hose is a singular task with a lot of complexity between that pump panel and the fire room, right? So pay it its due attention. Get out there, study your streets, practice your mask up times, work on your efficiency getting out the door, and work on that stretch. So thanks for everybody tuning in tonight. Stay tuned for next month. If you got any ideas of things you want us to talk about, be sure to send us an email. And everybody have a good night.